and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be back with another webinar. And yes, today we're going to be talking top tips for negotiating a pay rise. But before that, just a few introductions. So I'm Amy Staines, and I'm the Senior Financial Education Manager at Better with Money. And Better with Money is an independent provider of financial education. So we provide webinars like these to help bring money matters to life and provide the tools and knowledge to help you tackle your money. And we are always thrilled to be able to work with the ICE Benevolent Fund and Support Network to deliver these workshops. So huge thank you for taking the time to join us today. Now, a couple of housekeeping points to note before we get started as well. So first of all, I'm not a regulated financial advisor, so I won't be providing any sort of financial advice today, but rather I'll be providing guidance and education, aiming to provide you with the tools and knowledge to take action. And Better with Money are also not connected to any of the external organisations I mentioned as we go through today. So where I do reference other organisations or websites, it's because we genuinely believe they're really useful tools for you to take advantage of, rather than because we have any sort of financial incentive to do so. And finally, as Fiona has already mentioned, session is being recorded and there will be time for Q&A towards the end. So please do feel free to type your questions into the chat. So, the purpose of today's session then is to arm you with some top tips for negotiating a pay rise. Now, some of you might be in the process of actively seeking new employment, perhaps having regular conversations around remuneration. For some of you, this might just act as a useful reminder to build your confidence with your existing role and give you some useful hints and tips around maximising your income and how best to approach those salary increase requests and conversations. So, for the next 20 to 25 minutes, we are going to be looking at the following top tips. So, starting with knowing your worth and building your case. Then we're going to look at the importance of timing, practice. We're going to consider codes of conduct, life beyond pay, and seeing rejection as opportunity. And finally, looking at ways to make your pay go further. So, let's start then with knowing your self-worth, because when life gets busy and jobs get stressful, we can sometimes forget about this. And this is often particularly true and relevant for those who spend time working from home, as this can often mean missing out on that day-to-day interaction and contact with line managers, and perhaps that validation that we're doing a good job. So first things first, before we approach our employer for a pay increase, it's really essential to spend some time revisiting our skill set and reminding ourselves of the value contribution that we make to the business. Now, it's also a really good idea to take some time to understand how our current salary measures up against the average within the industry sector. And there are loads of free salary comparison calculators available online. And I have provided the web link to one from Total Jobs, and this allows you to search by job title, industry and region so that you can really make sure you are getting paid what you deserve and in line with the industry that you're working in. But in addition to those tools, it's also really important to consider how much demand there is for your specific role and the impact this would have on your business if you left, because all of this is intended really to give you greater leverage when you do come to negotiate your salary. Now, it's also really important to think about broader context as well. So, aside from just your own circumstances, because other factors can very much impact these sorts of conversations as well. And the COVID-19 pandemic was a prime example of this, because the pandemic had a huge financial impact on businesses around the country, around the world. And it's really important to keep that sort of thing in mind when you're having pay conversations. More recently, the change to national insurance for employers that is due to come into play. This is another example of an external factor that can impact on these conversations. So really important to make sure you're considering this as part of these conversations and considering any internal restructures and redundancies that you're aware of as well. So any restructures or redundancies taking place, it's probably wise to defer any conversations around salary increases until such a time when your company's back in a stronger financial position, because at that point you're far more likely to get a positive outcome at that point. So various things to think about here around knowing your worth, but this is a really useful place to start. So, having then assessed that professional worth and having gained an idea on the revised salary that you want, the next step is then to really think about documenting the reasons why an increase to your salary is deserved. And this is where we need to clearly quantify the value we are adding and bringing to the business. But where do we start with this? Well, first of all, and quite simply, creating a work journal is a really, really great first step because this enables you to create a written record of recent training, qualifications you've completed, key achievements, and standout moments, really. But most importantly, this is about pulling together measurable ways that these have benefited your employer. And actually formulating this as an online journal will make it quite easy, really, to capture copies of any feedback you're receiving, perhaps via email or screenshots from performance reports. And all of this can be used to evidence your worth and your value to your employer. And in fact, on the topic of feedback, try to actively seek feedback from colleagues to add to this record. So, for example, if you've recently completed a project or a great piece of work, or you've displayed really strong leadership or team working skills, ask a colleague to share some specific feedback, ideally in an email in a written format that you can add into this file to help you build up this evidence. And when thinking about the conversation itself and how you can bring these examples into that, try to also think about the structure of your examples as well. And a really, really useful acronym for this, and this was one that I was taught to use for performance appraisals and competency-based interviews as well. And that's to structure each answer as a self-addressed envelope. So SAE. S stands for situation, A stands for the action you then took, and the E is the effect it had. So that's self-addressed envelope, SAE, situation, action, effect. You might also have heard of STAR as well, that's another one. But both of these are really great to help you structure your answers and your examples to keep your point succinct, avoid going off on a tangent, or failing to actually evidence the part you played and the impact it had. So this is about quantifying the impact, adding really strong evidence to your examples, and facts and figures can really help as well with that quantification piece. And part of this always means highlighting those skills that you possess as well, particularly the ones that are in short supply or perhaps missing completely within your organisation. Because the more you can prove that you're indispensable to the business, the more likely you're going to be to secure that pay rise. So think about this as if you are your own salesperson. If you as an individual don't believe in your value and your contribution to the business, then it's going to be quite a tough task expecting someone else to believe in you. So this is why being able to present a really strong factual log of evidence is going to really help and act as a great tool in demonstrating your value and the reasons why that deserves to be rewarded. So that's building the business case, but let's now move on to tip number 3, which is all about striking it right, because timing really is everything when it comes to these conversations. Now, money is a very sensitive subject in general and not something that should be discussed with colleagues or really broached with your manager in the middle of the office. So, when you're having these conversations and thinking about how to approach them, make sure your request for a pay increase does get the right focus and the attention it deserves, and therefore consider arranging a specific meeting to discuss these topics. So try and avoid bringing it up at the end of a lengthy one-to-one. This can sometimes look as if it's an afterthought, perhaps. And also, some managers don't appreciate that element of surprise as it hasn't given them adequate time to prepare. So, really think about your timing and making sure this is formally on the agenda. And use your own relationship with the authorising manager to influence how you approach this meeting. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, and it might look different for everyone. But if you already know the manager and you already know that they would prefer a heads up, perhaps in an email outlining what it is you wish to discuss with them, think about doing this and make sure you therefore give them enough time. You might have the type of relationship with your manager where they can advise you how best to prepare for this meeting in advance to make sure that both of you are gaining maximum benefit out of the conversation. In other cases, it might be that giving too much information away up front isn't always the best approach. And actually, in some cases, it would be more beneficial to send a generic meeting request and then do your talking on the day. So, really, with this one, it's about using your past experience to dictate how best to approach the topic with your particular manager and basing this on the relationship that you have with them already. Now, the timing of the request is also really important to consider. So, you might be privy to information that the leadership team are already under extreme pressure, for example, perhaps from the executive board, perhaps involved in some time critical projects that require all of their focus and energy and attention. So, actually, putting them in a position where they'd need to run a salary review past their superiors might not go down particularly well at that point. So, really important to consider when you are making this request as well, and giving your manager the opportunity to be in a really good space and position to have the conversation, because in that case, it will probably be more useful for you. We also obviously touched upon earlier external economic factors as well. So we mentioned the pandemic, the impact things like this can have on organizations. So again, if you know your business is about to go through a restructure, resulting in a reduction to headcount, then it might be unlikely that requesting a pay increase during this time is going to be well received or indeed result in a positive outcome for you. So again, really important to pitch this at the right time to really stand the best chance of success. So that brings us then on to the next slide, and it's a wise old saying, but practice really does make perfect. So tip number 4 is grab a friend over a coffee and role play. Negotiating can be uncomfortable at the best of times and can make us feel incredibly nervous too. And this can really impair our ability to express ourselves effectively. So, the more we can practice, the more comfortable and confident we become, and the more skilled we become at doing it as well. So, if you do sit down with your friend, encourage them, whether that's a friend or whoever else you're using to practice with, ask them to ask you challenging questions to really allow you to practice giving succinct answers. So remembering to use that framework, so like that self-addressed envelope, SAE, like the STAR approach, if that's one that you've come across before. But use this as an opportunity to practice giving those answers and incorporating that evidence from your work journal to help quantify your examples. And let's just think about some example questions that you might be asked by your friend as part of this role play exercise. So, what level of pay rise are you looking for, and how did you get to that figure? Why do you think you deserve more money? How have you gone above and beyond your current role requirements? What extra responsibility would you be prepared to take on for the extra money? So, some really powerful questions here, but these may actually come up in the real thing. So, it's really worthwhile speaking these out loud with someone that you trust to really build that confidence in articulating your points clearly. Now, from time to time, many of us will experience this thing called imposter syndrome. And for anyone who isn't familiar with this term of imposter syndrome was first used back in the 1970s, and it refers to where you believe that you are not as competent as others perceive you to be. So perhaps you feel as if you don't belong where you are, perhaps you believe you only got there through luck. Now, some other characteristics can be perhaps undermining your performance, putting yourself down, self-doubt and sabotaging your own success as well, or being fearful that you won't live up to expectations. These are all characteristics of imposter syndrome. Now, originally, interestingly, this was thought to apply mainly to high achieving women, but it's actually now recognized more widely as being more widely experienced. And it's estimated that 70% of people will experience imposter syndrome at least once during their lives. So, this is a real thing. It can be a real struggle. So the key is believing in yourself, practicing selling yourself, coherently evidencing the value you bring to the business. Sometimes I even hear people suggesting saying some of your answers to yourself in a mirror, kind of looking at yourself in a mirror to help you really see and project confidence whilst you're having these conversations. And just whilst we're on this topic as well, if anyone is interested in exploring mind management models in more detail, I would really recommend the Chimp Paradox model by Professor Steve Peters. There's loads of great reading on lots of topics like this, including around imposter syndrome as well. So lots of reading that you can be doing. But with that in mind, once we've practiced, moving on to the next tip, and we spoke earlier about the importance of timing, and in addition to that is how to approach the meeting in the right way. So if you've got as far as successfully securing a meeting to discuss a pay rise, then there's an expectation that you are well prepared for it. So a really good tip is viewing this conversation just like a job interview, because this meeting is an opportunity to showcase your worth and influence someone's decision so that you get what you want out of the meeting. And in reality, we would never turn up for an interview without having spent hours preparing. So think about preparing in the same way, because the same level of preparation does apply for salary review meetings. And presenting a business case as part of this should only take a few minutes. So be really mindful of time. Remember to keep those answers short and precise. So, again, going back to that SAE structure when evidencing that impact you've made. Now, nerves do have an ability sometimes to make us overcompensate, perhaps talk too much, but really, there's a huge power that exists in silence when we are negotiating. So consider how you can keep your answers short and succinct. And once you've given that answer or made that point, listen to what's being said back to you and use that time to reflect and think through your next response. And it's also really important to note that although the aim of the meeting is to secure a pay increase, negotiation is not all one-sided. And so it's really important, as well as the negotiation side, to build rapport with the person you're talking to. So this means appreciating the company's perspective and demonstrating that teamwork, that acceptance as well. It might be that the business isn't yet in a financial position to increase a salary, but this really shouldn't be taken personally. And it should instead enable you to move that conversation to a more productive place where you can perhaps try and get agreement for a review maybe 6 months down the line instead. So, some level of flexibility is needed as part of this conversation as well. And in reality, it is unlikely that a company will straight away agree to your first increase request. There will usually be that negotiation, trade-offs, counter-offers, perhaps. All of these may be explored. So just be prepared for other outcomes, which we will have a look at in the next couple of slides in more detail. But the most important factor here relating to this point really is to remain professional at all times, stick to the matter in hand, and keep those examples that you've detailed in your business journal front of mind. Because with all of these things, it can be very easy for emotion to take over and come into play. You might go off track, you might start comparing yourself against others in your team, perhaps bringing up inside knowledge that you might have regarding other people's remuneration. But try not to do that, because you want the company and the person you're speaking to buy into you. You want to keep the topic on yourself, and you want to do everything in your power to enable them to really understand your value. But that will only happen if you conduct yourself in the right way. So think about how you're coming across, really making sure you're building that rapport and showing that level of flexibility as well. Now, on the previous slide, I mentioned these trade-offs and the counter offers that you might come across, because it may well be that, if your company isn't able to increase your salary, they might actually be able to enhance your benefits package in other ways. So it's really important, aside from the salary, to have done your research to see what other scope there might be. So for some people, a change to their job title or increased responsibility can really help make a positive difference to long-term career aspirations and their CV. So although this might not directly result in an increase to your take-home pay, it can really help accelerate opportunities and market value elsewhere. And it's becoming increasingly popular for people to request things like flexible working arrangements so that some of their salary can be saved by cutting commuting costs. And there are other examples of people securing home-based contracts, which has meant they've been able to move to a cheaper area, buy bigger houses for their money, etc. Now, additional holiday entitlement can also be a good negotiation point, especially if your company gives you the opportunity to sell a proportion of your holiday entitlement at the end of the year, as again, this can help you to increase your take-home pay in a different way. Now, another area you could explore is a training budget to pay for things like industry exams or other qualifications, which may help you to secure a promotion or more salary further down the line. And it's also not uncommon for companies to award enhanced pension contributions as well. To someone that perhaps they can either want to attract or they want to retain. So it doesn't necessarily, again, increase your take-home pay, but it does play a significant part in funding your retirement income down the line. And another example is company shares. So another area becoming very popular in terms of how companies can reward strong performance outside of salary reviews and providing that financial benefit that can be cashed in later down the line when the time is right. So lots of things to think about. Other examples as well include things like higher multiples of salary for death in service or other employee benefits as well. So well worth having these conversations to see what differences could be made, because sometimes in reality it's a lot easier for managers to get signed off in terms of increased benefits through HR, rather than having to present a formal business case to the board for additional remuneration budget. And so it can be kind of easier for them to use up budget from elsewhere, things like training and development. So do keep in mind the other areas that you might be able to make changes in. And the next point is around seeing rejection as opportunity, because there may be times when the answer is no, but we still need to see the positives that can come from a no, and try not to feel angry or sad or disappointed, because in this instance, this isn't a word that targets you personally, so it shouldn't dent your self-worth. It shouldn't make you feel that you aren't good enough. So try and view a no as instead a discussion point rather than a rejection. So see it as a new opportunity for both you and your employer. Don't allow it to shut down the possibilities of future pay increases, but instead think about the next steps. So first of all, seek a clear rationale as to why it's a no for now, and see if you can formalize a personal development plan off the back of this to proactively work on the areas that they've highlighted in that plan and agree a review date further down the line to revisit your progress against those areas and continue your business journal throughout this to keep that evidence and that data to show these achievements that you're making. And having this development plan in place will really help support your job growth by enabling you to build your skills, expand your expertise, strengthen career elevation as well, to really put you in a strong position for any internal promotions at a later date. So, lots of things to think about. You could also consider asking your boss to act as a mentor or perhaps seek support from other key stakeholders in the business, really making sure that you're listening and you're learning from the key influencers will really help you when conversations do come up in the future. But in cases where perhaps there isn't any further scope within your current department, this is where you might ask whether the business could support a secondment or perhaps a promotion in another department. And ultimately, if you've exhausted all avenues and you still don't feel like there's any commitment being given to support your desire to progress and enhance your career and your salary, it might be the time to consider exploring opportunities outside of your company. So conscious of the time, and I do want to leave time for questions, but I do just want to talk a little tiny bit about making your own pay go further. So really creating our own pay increase, because there is this misconception that if we just earn more money, then all of our financial stresses would disappear. But in reality, it doesn't matter how much we earn if we actually aren't managing our cash flow effectively and monitoring what we're spending on a monthly basis. So really the question I want to ask here is, how often do you review your spending habits, and when was the last time you challenged yourself to make your current pay go further? So start by completing a monthly budget, try to capture all of your expenditure in one place, and this will really make this task much easier for you. You can access budget planners through the Better With Money website, and I've linked that on the slide there. But really consider whether there are things that you can do to cut your current costs, because in reality, this does mean that you will have more pay on a monthly basis that you can then use towards other things that are important to you. So consider ways of making your current pay go further. But just to finish off then, signposting to a few useful resources. So we've obviously discussed lots of different areas associated with negotiating pay increase, but I have noted some useful websites here for you to go and have a look at if you do want to benchmark your salary against the industry average or see what job opportunities currently exist out there. And I also just want to share the details of the ICE Benevolent Fund and Support Network, who have sponsored the webinar today, and they can really provide invaluable financial, workplace and wellbeing support to you and your families. So here are their contact details. But I am conscious of the time, so hopefully we do have a few minutes for questions, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Amy. Yes, we've had a few questions come through. Someone's just asking, would you mind just repeating the reference that you mentioned when talking about imposter syndrome?
Yes, of course. Let me just go back to that slide and I will. Is this the imposter syndrome slide? Yeah, so that was the chimp paradox model by Professor Steve Peters. And that's
Super.
really around that mind management model, and yeah, some of those theories around how we feel and how we operate, and the reasons for that.
Brilliant, thank you. Another question we've had in is, do you have any tips about speaking to your colleagues about pay so that you can work out where you sit on the pay scale?
Yeah, so this is a topic that needs to be quite delicately managed, because in some organizations there are rules around speaking about pay with colleagues. I think the key is making sure that the people you're talking to are trusted colleagues, and actually possibly a better place to start is kind of HR policies that you can usually find on intranet pages and things like that. Often organizations will have formal pay scales that they do post internally. So I'd say start there. And if you do have questions, perhaps it's then worth going to HR or managers, just because you do need to be mindful of kind of the rules and the etiquette in some cases around speaking to colleagues around this. Some organizations do have quite strict rules in place. So you're best to start with the formal pay scales with HR. And if you do have questions, kind of going through some of those channels instead.
Okay, super. When first speaking about pay rises with your boss, should the first conversation be formal, i.e., an email and a meeting invitation, or could it be less formal, i.e., a quick call or just asking for a short meeting?
So I think this one does depend to some extent on the relationship you have with your boss and also how regularly you are in contact with them. In cases where perhaps you don't regularly speak to your boss, perhaps they're incredibly busy, they have lots of meetings, it might be better to put a formal meeting in the diary to talk about this. In cases perhaps where you see managers more regularly and you are having a more regular dialogue, it might then be appropriate to bring some of these discussions into those conversations so they are kind of up to speed with your thought process and where you're at. So I think this one will very much be a case by case basis, depending on the relationship you have with your manager and how often you talk to them as well. And also probably how often you have one-to-one meetings. Because if you have a one-to-one, say on a weekly basis, it might be that you could simply bring this discussion in then. If they're monthly, then it might be that you want to fit something in before your next, say, monthly, quarterly, or biannual one-to-one.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Someone's just asked if you wouldn't mind just popping the slide with the websites on it again. Just quickly whilst you're doing that, Amy, I'm conscious we've had lots of questions. So the last one I think is how should we write in the email we need to approach them about pay rises? Are there any useful places we could go to get some tips on phrasing?
Yeah, it's a good question. And in terms of websites, I will take that one away and have a look to see if there are any useful tools with that question in particular in mind. Um, Again, the email really depends on the formality of the conversation and I think your relationship with your manager. In a situation again where you're in contact with your manager regularly and perhaps it's a more informal relationship, it doesn't necessarily have to be an incredibly formal email. Other relationships with managers might look slightly different and require a more formal email. It also doesn't necessarily need to say everything. It can simply be as straightforward as, I'm looking to discuss this matter and would really appreciate putting some time in the diary to have a further conversation. Often these conversations are better being had as a discussion rather than putting lots in an email. So what I will do is I will take that one away and perhaps put some points down and websites. But yeah, think about the relationship that you've got with your manager and how you communicate normally with them. But you don't necessarily need to go into lots and lots of detail in the email itself because that's best saved for the conversation.